Hey everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a channel dedicated to all the amazing survivors of child sexual abuse here in New Zealand and out across the world. My name's Gloria Masters, I'm your host, and it's my pleasure every week to bring you either a survivor or someone involved in the survivor world. This week, as with all other shows, please do note the trigger warning. If for any reason you feel upset or disturbed by anything you hear, don't put yourself through it. Stop watching, go to the show notes below, and you'll be directed to some resource and support. So I've got an amazing guest for you this week. I think you're going to be thrilled that I got him on the show. Oops, I've given it away. It's a he. And he is Detective Inspector Scott Beard from the New Zealand Police. He's an incredible advocate, as well as working in both the child and adult sexual abuse space. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hello, Gloria.
Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. It's important. It's an important topic.
Yeah, really, really big. I as you know. So I guess, Scott, just hearing a little bit about what's led you to this point in terms of your kind of advocacy and the way that you are so supportive of survivors, both children and adults here and in Aotearoa. It's so heartening. What are you comfortable to share with us about this?
Oh, look, I think it starts with my journey in terms of my policing career. I joined the police in 1980. In 1986, I joined the criminal investigation branch and trained as a detective. And then it was in 1989 that I first started working in the child sexual abuse world. And since that time, I worked 3 years there. I've worked up in a place, small rural Maori community called Kaikoui, and there was a significant amount of child sexual abuse there. I've been a detective sergeant in charge of the child abuse team. As a detective senior sergeant, I've been in charge of the child abuse, and then it changed to the child protection teams. And now, as a detective inspector, I'm still in charge of the child protection team, the child exploitation team, which is the online offending, the child sex offender management team, who look after those on the sex offender register, and I'm also in charge of the adult sexual assault team in Auckland City.
Well, so not a small workload, and I guess some of what you must see or hear can be fairly confronting. I guess one thing from abuse survivors like myself is, you know, you're human. You do your best every day for the people that you serve, and it is a service. So I very much appreciate that. I guess some of the impact must be challenging at times, Scott. How do you manage all of that?
So yeah, for our teams, the type of work they do, there's 3 monthly psychological counselling,
Oh,
which they mandatory must attend. And if you look at the child exploitation, so that's the online pornography, the abuse of children online, and that's horrific. And so, we really have to look after our staff in that regard, and that's on a daily basis. They're looking and dealing with these offenders who are committing these crimes, and of course, when the offenders committed a crime, there's a victim. And for me, that they are our future in society, and if we don't look after them and we don't try and prevent what's going on around child sexual abuse, child exploitation, then we're failing ourselves for the future.
yeah, yeah. Because they are the future, and I'm so pleased and heartened to hear there's that 3 month psychological input, because the I'm just thinking what we see, what we hear, what we absorb can be carried with us, and sometimes we can be triggered without even realizing, and suddenly the simplest thing can set us off. So I imagine for your teams of people, men and women dealing with this, it must be.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the younger staff, some of them have children themselves, and they have to deal with this.
Yeah.
And we're very conscious of that accumulation effect. And so staff don't stay there for we sort of tend to look at 2 to 3 years maximum, and then rotate them, move them somewhere else. But as I say, we have teams because the workload is there, unfortunately.
So that's actually a nice segue. Thank you, caller. And hello, beautiful survivors watching. So great you could join in. And I know for some of us who have experienced this as children, we have had varying impacts in terms of dealing with law, with police, with legal teams around this. And it's such a privilege to have Scott with us today, because this is one of the better experiences, I think, and Scott will tell us a bit more about how that's evolved over the years and the decades. But before we get into that, Scott, you alluded to, I guess the bigness of the issue here in our beautiful country, New Zealand. What's your thinking around that, knowing that, wellingtonhelp.org stats are by the time a girl is 16, 1 in 3 will have been sexually abused, and for boys, it's 1 in 6. What's your feeling about this across the land?
Well, as I say, our children are our future.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is that those who suffer from child sexual abuse, there's a lot of cases where they become drug dependent, they become alcoholics, some become criminals, they live in violent relationships, the mental health issues
Yes.
of having to deal with what's happened to them when it shouldn't happen to them. And then the worst case scenario I've seen is the suicide. And we don't want that. And that has a huge impact on our society in the future, particularly when they're young, vulnerable children, and then they start growing up and living with what's going on. Counselling is huge, getting that counselling. But obviously, it's that first, who do they tell? Who's listening? Who believes them? And I know within the police, I've been 44 years in the police, and how we treat our child victims now and how we deal with them is completely different to how we did when I first joined the CLB. It's so much better. It's better for them. It's better in the courts for them. Not that the court is easy, we know that, but when it gets to that stage, it is way better than it used to be.
Yeah. Oh, and that's such a relief, isn't it? Like, when you think about beautiful young, tamariki raratangi, having to deal with any of it already is so difficult cognitively for them, because the understanding that the complexities of this whole issue can sometimes be well over their head. So, we've got that, and then the absolute fear about sharing what happened. And to not be believed, Scott, is one of the biggest things. This podcast has now been running since it's just on 2 years now, and there's a very small percentage of survivors that I've interviewed who actually were believed. So I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are around that, and how you and teams deal with that when you're being informed.
I think now when the police are informed, it's important, and I tell my staff working on these teams, the first thing you must do is believe that child. They're looking for someone who they can trust, someone who they can basically confide in about something horrific that's happened to them.
Yeah.
And it's important that we do believe them so they talk to us, because while you can't turn the clock back, a problem shared is a problem halved. And of course, we do a lot of work with counselling services and agencies, whether it be for children or adults. And so, but the first step is believe them. Yes, a police investigation might lead somewhere else and we might have to change it. But in the first instance, that child is looking for someone who they can trust and have the confidence to talk to. And so, police staff believe in them. And our staff know that, and they do that. We also have specially trained child interviewers, and they don't work out on the street every day. They've been police staff, but now they're involved solely in interviewing children of child abuse, and they are trained, specifically trained, and they are very, very good right across the country. And so the rooms we use, there's a couch, there's some toys there. It's very user friendly for the child, and so that's important because they've got to feel comfortable because it's not easy for them, and we know that.
Yeah.
But when you have specially trained staff to deal with, we have the facilities and the room that is very soft and very comfortable for them to be, that gives them the opportunity to tell their story.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. It does need to be child-centric, doesn't it? Because you're trying to get the child to a position or a place where they can share. So it's great to hear these specially trained people to do that. As I'm talking to you, I'm thinking about the amazing adult survivors who, perhaps have had repressed memories, which is not uncommon. And we know this to be true because as a child, we have what's called dissociation. And so the mind leaves. It can't stay in the body for the horror that's ensuing. So for a lot of our survivors, there can be repressed memories. And so I am leading to a question, stay right there. But the point being that when they do emerge with memories as an adult, it can then often lead to immediately being dismissed or not believed. And what that does, Scott, is take the survivor straight back to being the child again. Because the courage that had to be found to share the world is huge. So I guess I'm wondering if you've had adults that have come forward with historical cases and what that process has been like.
Look, it's really important to say it doesn't matter if we're talking about a child or an adult.
Yeah,
Believe them, get
yeah,
their story. Our job is, to listen to their story. It's recorded on video, DVD now, and then we do an investigation,
yeah,
and we go where the investigation takes us. Obviously, we're always looking for corroboration to support the story, and sometimes we don't get that, and sometimes we do. And then we're faced with what's called the Solicitor General Prosecution Guidelines, which is we have to go through before determining whether we should charge somebody, which ultimately the Crown prosecutors will look at as well in terms of our charging decisions. So there is a process to go through, but the first step is to believe, let that victim, whether adult or child, tell their story, then get them the support that they need to move forward.
yeah. It's really important. So powerful and so heartening to hear that said. And just taking you back to some things you mentioned, about the suicide and even, the percentage of prison inmates, both male and female, who have experienced child sexual abuse. the PTSD sufferers out there. There are many of us, and I think, when you look at it, it becomes a very big societal problem, doesn't it? Because, we have rehabs, very high percentage of people who have turned to drugs or alcohol, gambling, food, work, and become very addicted. So I think the cost is huge, and it carries on, um, can cast the shadow the length of a lifetime. They'll be interested in what you see, or what your thoughts might be around the cost to society with our high numbers, really.
Well, everybody wants, children, and particularly, your own children, to reach their potential, to do as well as they can,
Yeah.
in the world as they grow up and become adults. But of course, if they've been abused, particularly sexually abused, it holds them back. And if they don't get the right counselling, if they haven't been able to tell anybody, if they don't get the right counselling, if they're not believed, it really holds them back. And then, as you mentioned, alcoholism or drug dependency, the mental health issues, that's a cost to society. And that's not what we want. I think it's up to the community. It's the community that is going to be able to help resolve this, whether it's the people who might be able to see the change in a child, or just notice something that's not quite right, or see someone, an adult, who's, hang on, what are you actually doing here?
Yeah.
This child just doesn't feel right. Taking steps. If you know something, if you see something, if you hear something, say something and do something.
Yeah. There seems to be, and it's another nice segue, thank you, Scott, into the deafening silence around this. We've looked at our stats, we've talked about the numbers, and yet knowing that there are so many walking around who have experienced this as adults, and children still being abused today, and with the advent of AI, and you mentioned online grooming and abuse of children. I'm just wondering, got any thoughts around why the silence is so deafening?
Look, I think that, you know, it's always been a taboo subject to talk about, and people don't like to believe that it's happening. I've had cases in front of juries, and you can see the jury is struggling to believe that someone would do this to a child. But we know it does happen. And so I think the more in society we can talk about it, raise awareness about it, particularly now with social media, online. So, like children can look at pornography. They could be 10 years old and look at Pornhub on their phone. Well, they're seeing that. And so we're talking, it gets discussed more. And I think that's one of the things that I think moving forward, people will have a little bit more confidence in talking about it. And particularly if we're educating the teachers, if there's education in the schools, if the parents are talking to their children, if the parents are being aware of what are their children doing. They're online, but you could have a 14 or a teenage daughter who thinks she's talking to a teenage boy online, and it could be a 50-year-old paedophile. You just don't know. And it's that education, it's that stranger danger, keeping ourselves safe, all that. It plays a big part. But in saying that, we know with a lot of child sexual abuse, it's not strangers. It's someone they know. It's someone within the family, the whānau, and people, adults don't realise that, oh gosh, that person's done that
Yeah.
to my niece or my child.
Yeah.
It's just that being aware, that public awareness, and that just being conscious of what's happening and the interactions that's going on, and particularly if there's a change in behaviour of a child. Why has that happened?
100%. And you know, you and I have talked about the book I've just published on keeping kids safe. But to me, children don't talk. That's an adult construct. But what children will always do is show through their behaviour, their play, the way they interact, whether something's off. And I think sometimes for our amazing parents watching, there are, you know, it's almost to the point where they're being told, don't trust your instinct. And I'm here to say the opposite. You know your child. You could recognize your baby's cry when no one else could. You know when they walk a certain way, something's off. And I think it's about us starting to meet children where they're at and work with what they show us because it tells us everything. I think we've got to start to trust their behaviour over their words. So you're so right, Scott. In my opinion, a child at either end of the behaviour scale is the child that may have a problem. Or there's other things, aren't there? There's regression. If you see serious regression, a child starting to suck their thumb again when they haven't for 3 years, you know, I'm not saying it will always lead to child sexual abuse, but I think we've got to start picking up what children are putting down in terms of these red flags. Um, yeah, what's your thinking around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen investigations where we have a complaint come from a child and we start investigating, and then suddenly you're speaking to family and extended family, and some of them saying, "Yeah, we noticed, thought she was a bit different,"
Yeah,
but it's just raising that awareness of where people realise and think, "Okay, something's changed here. What's happening?" Now, obviously, from a investigative prosecution point of view, we don't want leading questions asked of the child. But certainly someone says, "What's happening? What are you doing?" Or just pay a little bit more closer attention because something is obviously happening. If that child has changed, and a lot of them go into their shells and stop talking and
yeah,
stop sort of socialising, being friends, and like little things like that.
yeah,
Why?
yeah,
And I think if the adults around them see that, start asking themselves the question and paying attention to what's going on around, who's around, we get complaints where it's a child's gone to their friend's place and it's their friend's stepfather. And of course they all get told, don't tell anyone because you know, um, something bad will happen to your family or you'll
yeah,
be taken away from your family. It's just the veiled threats there, and so sometimes they're too scared to actually say things.
yes,
But
yeah,
we want them to feel comfortable, and that's where those closest adults around them are so critical. We don't want to be offenders, but we want them to be observant as to what's going on. How can we
yeah,
be aware that something might be happening and let's stop it early
yeah.
or even before it begins? If you see somebody's actions and you think, why is that guy got that girl sitting on his knee? Like, yeah, like just pay attention.
I love that you say that, and it brings me to something I've trying to say to parents, and I do get a bit of pushback. So just be interested to know your thoughts. To me, people, please stop making your children or grandchildren hug or kiss or hold an adult's hand, because if they want to, if they feel safe with the parent, the auntie, the granddad, whatever, great. They'll naturally be wanting to hug them and run to them and kiss them goodbye. But I think sometimes we can see in children they're not comfortable around a certain person. Now, hey, it could be that Popper's got a prickly beard. Oh, Or it could be that Nana's breath's smelly. It could be that simple. But all I'm saying is, I think it's really important. A step further in keeping kids safe is maybe don't make them touch people quite so much. And I know it's an inherited thing, and I know as as parents and grandparents out there, it's sort of, but they're fine with me. Well, they probably are, but there are some children that won't be feeling safe to do that. So, yeah,
Yeah, and I think, and we go back to the numbers, like I think, is it by 16,
yeah,
1 in 3 girls would have been sexually assaulted in their life. And I think it's 1 in 6 boys, and that's from the official stats. So, yeah, we've just got to stop that because that is just going to cause problems for them moving forward. And a lot of times, it also disrupts the family. If it's someone within the family, then that family starts to fragment. And, that's not good for other siblings. And, yeah, it's that awareness. For me, it's just getting that awareness out there. Yes, it is a difficult subject. We
yep,
all accept that.
yeah, yeah.
But, we've got to be big and strong, and we've got to look after our young people coming through.
Well, and if not you, then who? I mean, I'm talking generic you, Scott, not the New Zealand Police. I'm talking to all adults everywhere. At some point we've got to join together on this, and I don't think we've got the luxury of looking away anymore. This is happening. The numbers are too big for us to keep thinking NIMBY, not in my backyard. Uh, because it could be someone that equally who is a pedophile or a predator, because they certainly seem to be everywhere. Scott, are you able to identify what a typical pedophile would be like, or gender, socioeconomic, any of that?
Well, most of our offenders are male. We know that. They can range in age. We're now seeing situations where, with the access to pornography online at a young age, that's becoming the norm for some of the young teenage boys.
Yeah,
And then when they get into their sexual experiences with girls, they're not taking no for an answer because what they're seeing online is what they expect. And sometimes there's pressure on the girls to do what has been seen online. And that's not fair because consent is consent. Person should be able to say no whenever they want and not feel pressured into relenting because a person wants to have sex with them. And it's getting that message out around consent, around online pornography, around online chats. As I said before, you could have a teenage girl who thinks she's talking to a teenage boy, but is a pedophile. And so some of these pedophiles, we see at times, they will try and get into relationships with solo mothers, with children, whether it be boys or girls, and they manipulate the mum, then they groom the child, and then sexually abuse them. And so it's that awareness of your relationships, of the people around, because I don't think you can stereotype a pedophile as such because they come from all walks of life. Well, we've seen them within sports coaches, within the church, within the education things, right across the board. We see these offenders. But of course, as I say, majority are known and within the family or extended family.
yeah. I heard that it's a 90-10 split. 90%, or in the UK they say it's 93% of sexual abuse occurs is by someone who is either family or well known to the family. So yeah, it's gone are the white van and the man in the white van.
Yeah, but then that still happens. We still have the people, we call them curb crawlers or the suspicious approaches where, someone in a van drives up or a car drives up to a child walking along the street. Can you give me directions? Can you come over here and give me directions? Oh, would you like a lolly? You know, and if we don't teach our children about that stranger danger and keeping ourselves safe, you know, they could fall into the trap. And the worst case scenario, and very rarely, but it has happened, is a child is abducted, raped, and murdered. That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah. You were talking before about, the online grooming and abuse of children. And of course, these predators know what they're doing because the apps like YouTube, Snapchat, Twitter, which is now X, Instagram, Discord, you know, uh, Facebook, they're scouring these sites looking for children to target and abuse. And for most parents who have, children, I don't know, even as young as 8 who are playing games online or, um, you know, messaging, it's very, very difficult for them to say, look, you can't. But, there are some rules that can be laid out and put in place. And I think it's just about having these conversations, Scott, so that people are informed, because once you know, you can't unknow. What do you think? Mm.
No, yeah, absolutely. And look, one of the side issues around social media is, you know, people are encouraged to send nude photos of themselves. Now, if you're a teenage boy or a teenage girl and you have sent a nude photo to someone, do you know who you're sending it to? Because sometimes it doesn't matter whether it's another teenager or it's an unknown older person because they're passing themselves off as a teenager. And then they start manipulating and pressuring you because, oh, I've got a nude photo of you. If you don't do this or you don't give me this money, I'm going to post it online so all your friends can see.
Yeah,
And that does happen.
yeah,
And that has a huge impact on young people, in a negative way. I mean, psychological abuse is huge, and it's for some it's tough. And once again, we see that mental health suicide,
yeah.
and we don't want that.
Well, and I'd heard it called sextortion, so I think we're talking about a similar thing. And even more, Scott, I've also heard again from overseas, not necessarily in New Zealand, but in the States, that some of these predators are grooming children to get other children involved, taking photos. And and of course, police can't prosecute a child, can they? So it's very clever the way it's done. And we know that amazing young people sometimes take their own lives because it's just too hard. The whole shame of it and the fear.
Yeah. So sextortion, as you said, it's one of the new phenomenons that's developed over the recent years,
Yeah,
and we see it a lot.
yeah. So that's becoming more of a thing. Have you noticed or heard anything, since the advent of AI now, whether or not that's having much of an impact? Um,
I haven't noticed in terms of any investigations AI having an impact around child sexual abuse or the adult sexual abuse world, but we know AI is there, and there are some people out there who will use it any way they can to an advantage, whether it be financially or sexually. And so I suppose it's something that we just have to be aware of, that at some stage it is going to start happening. And as I say, we already know that prominent people can put out there to scam people of money and say they're promoting this product where it's not even that person doing it. It's just AI has created in their voice.
pretty scary.
Yeah.
For those among us who aren't perhaps digitally um, really switched on, like myself at times. I know survivors, I don't often say it, but it can be a struggle. So I guess, Scott, just thinking about, we've looked at red flags, we've looked at the types of apps that are being used to target children, and it can be very, very sophisticated. And I know we had a volunteer at Handing the Shame Back who had an 11-year-old boy, and he came into the bedroom one night and said, Mummy, there's someone wants me to take a photo with my shirt off, and is asking me about his little sister who was 4. So luckily, Mum and Dad were switched on enough, and managed to get hold of the police and talk about what was happening. But I think all of that can be very insidious. It can be a slow burn, and suddenly there's this exploitation, and yeah.
If I can use just an example,
Yeah.
just a couple of years ago, where one of my staff from the child exploitation team did a fantastic investigation, and all it was a father thought an older guy in a shopping mall. He just thought, because he had his 4-year-old daughter, the father had his 4-year-old daughter there, and thought, "What's that guy doing? Is he filming up my daughter's dress?" He made a complaint, and came to the police, and we managed to get the CCTV, identify who that offender was. And he was an older guy, he'd been a teacher, and we ended up with 83 victims, both children and adults, both with photographing up their skirts, but also contact offending, so indecent assaults, sexual assaults. And it was from a range of strangers and also family, people, and friends. And he ended up being charged, I think it was about 180 odd charges. But that's just started off from one father thinking, that God, what's he doing hanging around my daughter? Is he taking a photo of her dress? That's what started.
Good on him. And I think that's a little bit of what you're kind of commenting to us, isn't it? If you see something, say something, do something. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Because this isn't it is not a police problem. It is not a survivor problem. It is not a teaching problem. This is a whole society problem, and I think people need to stop looking away and start leaning in. I don't think we have the luxury of looking away anymore.
No, and I believe that it's a community problem, and it's a community that can help to solve the problem. Governments can make laws and stuff like that, but it still comes down to the community. It's the community out there.
Yeah. And, the New Zealand police aren't going to turn anyone away who has concerns, either, are they? So,
Absolutely not. And sometimes those concerns, while they might not lead further, if it's there and then something else happens, oh, hang on, we had a previous report about this guy. Ah, let's have a look further now.
yes. So you do get that, and that means where you can put a little red flag by someone's name, and if there's any more.
Yeah, yeah. If someone rings up and says, this car here with this described person in it was, in a park, and let's just use, was masturbating, because it happens. There are adult men that go to a park with children, and that's what they do. Now tell us that so we know that, because then we can take some action. Sometimes we get to a situation where we can't prosecute, but at least we've done some work. And so if another report is reported later on, we can then look back at that first report and is this propensity evidence? Can we use that in support of this latest
Yeah.
incident.
It's interesting, isn't it? I actually had that happen to me. I used to live up in Stanmore Bay, and I was running along, and I ran down to Red Beach and back, and there was this. Happened a couple of times, same guy. So I got hold of the police, and they came out, and but it was a thing, and of course we do know that sexual abuse consists of not just contact offending. It can be someone who's masturbating in front of a child or making the child watch, the term is child sexual abuse materials, as in, videos or DVDs or, it's still images. So I think we have to be clear, don't we, about that's actually not okay as well. That's criminal activity. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
It's just, as I say, it's just keeping your eyes open, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your children and what they're doing and who they're playing with, and dare I say it, just being aware of other adults that they are associating with, your friends, parents,
Yeah,
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 or their
100%.
parents. Yeah,
100%. And, I've even heard people say, but he's a really nice guy. I like him.
yeah.
Really? Doesn't mean he didn't abuse that child. Um,
But that's the manipulative confidence that some of these pedophiles have. Some of them will say they're a photographer and that, they take photos and your child looks really good and take some photos. But what's that for? Where does that lead to?
yeah.
And
And then
we've had that previous.
100%. And that leads me to something else. You know, a lot of parents, as you should be out there, amazing parents and grandparents. You love your kids, you want to take lots of photos. I guess my concern is I just look at some of the photos that are being put out there, and I don't know that everyone that's seeing them is a safe person. So one of the things, and I'm sure Scott, you'll have an opinion on this too, is maybe don't just publicly post photos of baby doing the first crawl or running into the sea, you know, naked or whatever. And simply because I think we just have to be more mindful that not everyone is a good person out there.
Yeah, it's interesting the amount of photos that travel the world. Like photos of New Zealand children that on the dark net or within certain sites that the pedophiles use get traded and moved around the world. And the online offending is a concern because if someone, because some is just not photos, some is abuse of that child. So for all that online offending, there's a victim there.
Yeah.
And what we know from the stats is that I think it's 15 to 70% of online offenders, so those people looking at child exploitation material, become contact offenders. That is when they actually physically, sexually assault a child. Now, yeah. So the online offending, while people think, oh, yeah, but there's no harm in that because we're only looking, they're looking, but there's a victim behind it, young child. But so those people who are looking can't just look because they've got to go on and touch. And we've got to be careful of that.
Yeah. I was on a UK radio show last year being interviewed, and the interviewer made this point, and I thought, I love it. And this that every child sexual abuse material, whether it's a movie or still images, is a crime scene. It's a crime scene. Scott, you New Zealand Police will prosecute, yeah, if you find child sexual abuse materials.
Absolutely. We have child exploitation teams, and that's what their main function is looking at the online child exploitation material
Yeah.
and who's accessing it, who's manufacturing it, who's possessing it, and who's distributing it.
Yeah.
And that's what we look at. And we have a team, like certainly in Auckland City District, we have a team dedicated to that.
Yeah. And you don't have a team for no reason. You have a team because it's there.
The work is there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you noticing an increase in numbers or percentage of users looking at that material? Are you noticing that over the past 5 years?
Yeah, the stats and the figures would indicate that the amount of people through ISP sites, downloading or looking at child exploitation material, the numbers across New Zealand are growing significantly, which is a concern because if it's growing because of online, then it means the contact offending is going to grow.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
No, we don't. So look, just as we're coming into close, a question from me, and then please share anything else you would like us to know. If our amazing audience watching do suspect anything, and I'm sure it's similar across the world, but for the sake of the New Zealanders watching, if they suspect anything or a child discloses, what is the first port of call, please?
Well, so in New Zealand, it's either Oranga Tamariki
Yeah.
or New Zealand Police. And we work closely with Oranga Tamariki
Okay.
in that regard. And we work closely with the non-government organisations. And we'll get support, we will listen to them, we'll get them interviewed and make sure that ongoing counselling and that they're safe. That's the first thing. Are they
Yes.
safe?
Yes.
We have to make sure these children are safe.
Yeah. And I know you and I talked a little offline earlier about, if your child's sick, you believe them. What do you need? Do you want to snuggle up to mummy, or lie on the couch with blankie or whatever? A child discloses sexual abuse, they're not believed. And so I think we make it very hard for children sometimes, partly because of the nature of the topic, but partly because it's such a heinous crime. So Scott, any kind of last words or thoughts from you?
No, look, I think, all the parents out there, generally decent, trying hard. Nobody teaches a parent to be a parent.
No.
That's life. You pick that up through how you were parented or how you see others. And it's the same with children. Children are growing up, and it's a different world for parents now. Children are growing up with so much more access to online stuff. It's just be aware, be a good parent, but protect your child. In general, they are. Most children are good. Get them into sports, get them into some cultural activity, get them involved, but be aware. Just be aware and be there for them. And if they want, because if you're there for them, they will talk to you. If you have a good relationship, a good enough relationship, and something's gone wrong, they will talk to you. When you hear that, believe, support them, go to the authorities, whether it's around Tamariki, New Zealand, or the New Zealand Police, and go from there. And then from that point, OT or police, believe the child, get a video interview, a DVD interview done, get the support around them, an investigation takes place. It might end up in court, it might not. The important thing is that we believe that child, this is what I said at the start, and that they get the proper support and counselling to move forward so that no one can turn the clock back, but at least moving forward, they have some coping mechanisms through the counselling to deal with what they've dealt with, and they can be the best citizens they can be as they get older.
That's amazing. So Scott, please stay right there. Audience, very grateful to have had Scott with us. I think it's so important we hear from the men and women who deal with this crime, every day, and it's really informative and useful for us. And Scott said a couple of well, he said a lot of things actually. But one of the things he did say, and I have to say it again, is if you see something, say something, do something. So, as always, lovely ones, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you. And until next time.